I talk about nature's best hope quite a bit, and I give you a spoiler, you're nature's best hope. So I'm really going to talk about why I think you're nature's best hope. Before I do that, though, let's talk about what E.O. Wilson's idea of nature's best hope was. Of course, the late E.O. Wilson, probably the most famous and productive scientist Harvard has ever turned out. Extremely long career. And he was an entomologist too, by the way. But one of the things that was consistent throughout his very long career was his love of life on planet Earth and his efforts to save it. And he wanted to save it not just because he loved it, but because he knew it was essential to our own survival. So in 2016, I guess I got ahead of myself, he wrote that book, Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life, and he had one simple message. He said, if we're going to save life anywhere on planet Earth, we're going to have to save nature. We're going to have to save functioning ecosystems on at least half of the planet, or it will disappear everywhere, and that includes humans. It was a very bold statement, and he spent most of the book talking about the science that supports that very bold statement, and then he ended the book. He didn't spend a lot of time telling us how we were going to save nature on half of planet Earth. Of course, to a conservation biologist, that's a great idea. Let's put half the Earth aside, and all those things that are in trouble can be in that half. We'll be in the other half, and it'll be great. Problem is, the half of terrestrial Earth is already in some form of agriculture, and I don't see that disappearing anytime soon. And we have now 8.3 billion people in the other half, along with all of our roads and airports and hardscape and detritus, and we don't have a third half to put aside for nature. So how can we realize E.O. Wilson's dream? That's really what I want to talk about today, and I think we can. But we need a new approach to conservation to do that. Before we talk about that, though, let's talk about oak mass. Oak's one of my favorite plants, you know. Every once in a while, they get together and decide they're going to make their acorns at the same time. And this is what it looks like when they do that. Well, I'm easily entertained. So I take one of those acorns and I just stare at it. And sometimes I'm rewarded. An insect starts to chew its way out of the acorn, chews a little hole for its head, then it forces its head through there, then it forces its entire body through that hole. It's a tight squeeze. And once it's out of the acorn, it's a dangerous time for that insect larva because it's good to eat. A lot of things are after it. So it gets to safety by wiggling and squirming beneath the soil surface. That takes about 30 seconds. And once it's underground, it stretches in all directions and forms a chamber. And then within that chamber, it converts itself to a pupa and surprisingly stays in that underground chamber as a pupa for 2 years. After 2 years, comes out as an acorn weevil. That's what a weevil looks like. A lot of people think weevils have big noses because it looks like they do, but that's actually an extension of the head capsule, and the mouth parts are way down there at the end of that extension. They take those mouth parts, chew a hole into the center of the acorn, turn around, lay an egg in it, and that is how the larva gets into the acorn. Why do they spend 2 years underground? Why don't they come out the next year the way most insects would? Well, it takes acorns, the red oak group, many of the species of acorns, 18 months to complete their development. So if they come out the next year, there wouldn't be enough acorns for them. Of course, after they leave the acorn, it leaves a hole. It's kind of like a true vacuum. You know that nature abhors a vacuum. And in this case, she's filled it with 3 species of temnothorax ants, tiny little ants where the entire colony lives in the holes made by acorn weevils after they'd left the acorn. And if scouts find a new hole in a new acorn, they get all excited because their old acorn is falling apart. So I tell everybody it's time to move. Grab the larvae, grab the eggs, move the entire colony into the new acorn. That takes about 30 minutes. And once they're in there, they post a guard, make sure nobody else comes in. And that's where they live for the next 2 years until that acorn falls apart. What's my point with this little story? That's just one of literally millions of very specialized relationships, largely between animals and plants, that comprise the bulk of nature. This is another one, the relationship between jays and acorns. Jays are the primary disperser of oak acorns. They'll take an acorn, fly up to a mile, sometimes a mile and a half from the parent tree, tap it below the surface of the soil. And the object is they're going to go back in the wintertime and have something to eat. But for every 4 acorns they bury, they only remember where one is. So for every 4 acorns they bury, they've actually planted 3 oak trees. And a single jay can bury 4,500 acorns every fall. Specialized relationship between pileated woodpeckers and carpenter ants. That's what they rear their young on, carpenter ants. So you won't have pileated woodpeckers unless you have a lot of carpenter ants, and you won't have a lot of carpenter ants unless you have the big trees that make those carpenter ants. You won't have the beloved Emarginia, that beautiful moth, unless you have mistletoe. And that's their host plants, what the larva feeds on. And you won't have mistletoe unless you have the big oaks that support that mistletoe. You won't have about 100 species of bees in California unless you have the pollen of perennial sunflowers. Turns out that pollen specialization is very common in our native bees. We've got almost 4,000 species of native bees, and over a third of them can only reproduce on the pollen of particular plants. So if you take away sunflowers, you lose 100 species of bees. So nature is a group of specialized interactions. The point I want to make here today is that most of these interactions today are in trouble. Nature itself is on the ropes. And it's on the ropes because we didn't take Teddy Roosevelt's advice. Way back in 1908, Teddy heard that the state of Arizona was going to mine the Grand Canyon. So he went to the canyon, looked out over the edge, and he said, "Leave it as it is." And with those 5 words, he started the process of creating the Grand Canyon National Park. Well, we didn't leave most of it, particularly the lower 48 states, as it was. There's only about 5% that's anything close to its original pristine ecological condition. And those are typically mountaintops. And that's because we have logged the country repeatedly. We have tilled it. We have drained it. We have grazed it. We got 770 million acres of rangeland out there. That's 4.5 times the size of Texas, dedicated to cattle. And of course, we paved it or otherwise developed it. We have straightened our rivers and dammed them. You can spell that any way you want. We've polluted our skies, changed our climate for centuries to come. We have drained our aquifers. We've introduced more than 3,300 species of plants from other continents, many of which are running amok in our natural areas. In short, we've carved up those natural areas into tiny remnants of their former selves. And each one of those remnants is too small and too isolated to sustain the amount of nature needed to sustain humans. Edwin Wade Teal decades ago said we cannot make the world uninhabitable for other forms of life and have it habitable for ourselves. It's the most basic common sense. Yet that is, in fact, what we have been doing. We're continuing to do that, and you might wonder why. I don't know. But I suspect we thought that the earth, our nest, was so large, we could foul it forever and there wouldn't be any consequences. But of course, that's not true. And that's why we're seeing some really scary headlines these days at a pretty regular clip. So something like the insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Talking about global insect decline. Followed by this one, North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. A third of our North American bird population already gone. The UN is predicting we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction in the next 20 years. And they made that prediction 3 years ago. So now I guess it's the next 17 years. It's a prediction. It hasn't happened yet. And we have to make very sure it doesn't happen because these are the species that run the ecosystems that we all depend on. It is serious stuff. So I could go on talking about the pox that we humans have delivered upon the environment, and as Shakespeare would say, upon all of our houses. But that's not what this talks about. This talks about a cure for that pox. It's a cure that'll take small efforts from lots of people like you and me, but those efforts will deliver enormous physical, psychological, and environmental benefits to everybody. Let's return briefly to this headline. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Back to E.O. Wilson. He told us what would happen if insects were to disappear from Earth, and he did it way back in 1987 with this paper, The Little Things That Run the World. And again, his message was very clear. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, lots of nasty things would happen. 90% of our flowering plants would disappear. And if that happened, that would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems that the food webs that support our vertebrate animals would collapse. We would lose our amphibians, our reptiles, our birds, and our mammals. The biosphere, the living portion of the Earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients, and all we would have is bacteria and fungi. And again, humans wouldn't survive any of those drastic changes. Now, there is good news. And that is that none of that has to happen. We can save our insects. We can save our birds. We can save nature itself. But we're going to have to change the way we landscape to do it. Why is that? Well, remember, humans are products of nature. We are totally dependent on the life support that ecosystems provide. We call them ecosystem services. These are just a few things that plants do that we depend on every day, like produce oxygen, pretty important, clean our water. When it rains, the water's rushing to the sea. Well, plants slow down that journey to the sea. And once it's in the ocean, it's too salty to use. They're cleaning the water as it goes. Carbon capture, enormously important today. Plants are pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, out of harm's way, building their tissues out of that carbon. And they fix more carbon through photosynthesis than they can use, so they pump the extra carbon into the ground through their root systems. And once it's in the ground, it's extremely stable. Plants are building topsoil, they're holding it in place, they're preventing floods, they're dampening severe weather, they're converting sunlight into food. If we lose our plants, we're going to have to eat sunlight, and then we will lose weight. What are animals doing for plants? Lots of things, but mostly providing pest control services. They're pollinating nearly 90% of our flowering plants, dispersing plant seeds. So designing landscapes like this that destroy the production of ecosystem services is just not a good idea. Never was a good idea, but today it's a terrible idea because of those 8.3 billion people demanding more and more ecosystem services every day. Now, we do have parks, we do have preserves, they're doing the best they can, but it's not good enough. We're rapidly heading towards the 6th great extinction event the planet has ever experienced. So I think the solution is to start to practice conservation outside of parks and preserves on landscapes just like this. Now, there have been visionaries through the ages who've recognized that we humans needed to work on our relationship with planet Earth, and Aldo Leopold was one of the most eloquent. He wrote extensively in the first half of the 1900s. One of the things he said is the oldest task in human history is to live in a piece of land without spoiling it. There have been indigenous groups been able to do that for long periods, but our huge Western societies and our huge Asian societies are terrible at doing that. We habitually take more from the earth than it has to offer, completely wrecking an area, going to another area, doing the same thing, not sustainable behavior. But Aldo Leopold had a lot of faith in humans. He believed we were capable of developing what he called a land ethic. He knew we had to use the land. We had to farm and graze and lumber and mine and do all of those things. But he believed we could learn to do them gently enough that we did not destroy local ecosystems. That's what he called a land ethic, and he wrote about it in the Sand County Almanac, his most famous book. What he did not write about was developing a land ethic where we actually lived. And I'm not sure why that was, but I suspect the notion that humans and nature cannot live together, cannot coexist in the same place at the same time. That notion was so deeply embedded in the culture of Aldo Leopold's day, still remains in our own culture. He might not have recognized it as an option. What I want to argue today, though, is not only is living with nature an option, it is now the only viable option that's left to us. In the past, of course, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We now need to turn that on its head and practice conservation where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much everywhere. And that means we've got to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes. Not hang on by a thread, not get diminished every day, but thrive. Where should we start? Private property, because most of the country is privately owned. 78 to 80%, depending on which website you look at, of the lower 48 states is privately owned. 85.6% east of the Mississippi is privately owned. If we don't practice conservation on private property, we're going to fail, and failure is not an option. When I use the word conservation, I'm not using it exactly the way I mean. We do want to conserve any bits of nature that are left out there. That's been our conservation model for the last century, and we want to keep doing that. But again, it's not good enough, so we have to go beyond conservation into restoration. We have to start to rebuild functional ecosystems in as many places as possible. And if you're thinking, well, there's no way you're going to put it back together again the way it was, you are probably correct. We have changed too many things. But we can reunite enough of those specialized interactions that I opened the talk with to create ecosystem function again, even if it's not exactly what was in a particular space at some point in the past. But in order to do that, we have to start with the building blocks. Not all species contribute to ecosystems equally. So we have to start with the most powerful groups. And there's two groups we can't do without. One is the flowering plants. And of course, the pollinators allow those plants to reproduce. They're capturing energy from the sun and through photosynthesis, turning it into the food, the simple sugars and carbohydrates that supports just about all the animals on the planet. So now we have all the food that animals need locked up in plant tissues, mostly leaves. If you don't get that food to animals, you don't have any animals. And if you don't have any animals, you don't have functional ecosystems. Well, it turns out that most vertebrates don't eat plants directly. Most vertebrates eat invertebrates that ate plants. Most of those invertebrates are insects, and not just any insect. Turns out that caterpillars are enormously important in terms of transferring energy from plants to animals. They're transferring more energy from plants to animals than any other type of plant eater. So if we design landscapes that don't have a lot of caterpillars in them, we're going to have failed food webs and eventually failed ecosystems. I think there are a couple of slides here. We lost a couple of slides. I'm going to give you an example with the Carolina chickadee. That is the chickadee that is in my yard and southeast Pennsylvania. But there are chickadees all over the country. You've got 3 species of chickadees here in California, all pretty much the same bird doing the same thing. And one of the things they're doing is eating seeds at our feeders. And we tend to think that's all chickadees need is seeds. Well, even in the wintertime, only 50% of their diet is seeds. The other 50% is insects and spiders, even in the wintertime. And so when it comes time to reproduce, the interesting thing is their babies can't eat seeds at all. So they have to give up on seeds. They have to switch to invertebrates. And if they're in a healthy environment, they will rear their young exclusively on caterpillars. And they are not alone. 96% of our terrestrial birds rear their young on insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. So there's something special about caterpillars. What is it? There's actually several things special about caterpillars, and one of them is that they are soft. So think of this guy as if he's a little sausage with a very thin wrapper. The thin wrapper is exoskeleton. It's made of chitin. It's undigestible. And because they're soft, you can stuff them down the throat of your offspring without fear of injuring them. And if you've ever watched a parent bird rear their young, they're pretty rough. It's like a plunger. Caterpillars are also relatively large prey items. One medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. Now, some of our smaller birds do chase aphids around, but you want to chase 200 aphids or get one caterpillar. They're also nutritious. They're very high in fat, very high in protein, low percentage of chitin compared to many other insects, particularly beetles. Beetles are not like little sausages. They're like little tanks. So much of a beetle is undigestible, and many beetles have really sharp edges, too. And then finally, it turns out that caterpillars are the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. And I mention carotenoids not because I love organic chemistry, but because I'm a vertebrate, and you're a vertebrate, and birds are vertebrates. And we vertebrates cannot make our own carotenoids. Only plants make carotenoids. So we have to get our carotenoids from plants. And we have to get them from plants because carotenoids are essential components of vertebrate diets. Where are the birds getting their carotenoids from during the breeding season? From those things they bring back to the nest. But look, carotenoid content is not equally distributed among bird prey items. These first 2 bars here are types of caterpillars. They have far more carotenoids than other types of bird prey. Here are the adult caterpillars. Here, the moths and butterflies themselves, they have far fewer carotenoids because they're not eating the green leaves. That's where the carotenoids are. And there's the earthworm way over there. So the early bird gets the worm, but he doesn't get any carotenoids when he gets the worm. So there's other studies that suggest for most birds, caterpillars are not optional parts of their diets. They are essential parts of their diets. So let's just say most birds need caterpillars. The next question is, how many caterpillars do they need? Is 1 or 2 enough? Or 1 or 2 a day enough? It's a good question. So let's go back to Carolina chickadees. How many caterpillars does it take to make a nest of Carolina chickadees? The reason you're using Carolina chickadees is there's a lot of data on Carolina chickadees. Well, 1 or 2 is not enough. 1 or 2 a day is not enough. It takes thousands, 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to get 1 clutch of chickadees to the point where they leave the nest. And after they leave the nest, they continue to feed their babies, caterpillars, another 21 days, but they're flying all around, so nobody's been able to count that. So you're really talking about tens of thousands of caterpillars required to get 1 clutch of a bird that's 1/3 of an ounce through to maturity. That's 4 pennies worth of bird. And if you want chickadees to breed in your yard, and I would think you do, you need all those caterpillars in your yard because they only forage about 50 meters from the nest. And that's true for the most of the birds that are out there. They're foraging very close to the nest. They are not flying 5 miles down the road to the nearest woodlot. And if we landscape in a way that does not include all those caterpillars, that's called insect decline. And it's really looking like insect decline is one of the major causes of the bird declines that people are measuring. We went to the original data set of Rosenberg et al. That's the group, the Smithsonian group, who said that we've lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. And we divided terrestrial bird species in North America into 2 groups: the species that require insects, particularly when they're breeding, and the species that do not require insects when they're breeding. So things like doves and finches and crossbills can actually make a little milk out of the seeds that they eat, and they can rear their young on that little milk. And look, that group didn't decline at all in the last 50 years. But the birds that require insects decline on average 10 million individuals per species. That does not prove cause and effect, but it does suggest that as you take bird food away, you lose the birds. So I think we need to raise the bar about what we're asking our landscapes to do. In the past, we've asked them to do one thing, be pretty. Now we're going to ask them to do 2 things, be pretty and ecologically functional at the same time. And that's not going to happen unless we put those all-important caterpillars back. So how do you do that? How do you add caterpillars to a landscape? You do that by adding the plants that support those caterpillars. Seems pretty straightforward. But there is a catch, and that is that most plants do not support a lot of caterpillars. So we have to be fussy about which ones we're choosing for our landscapes. And we have to be fussy about it because the caterpillars themselves are fussy about it. And the monarch butterfly illustrates that perfectly. You can have all the eucalyptus and all of the hostas and all the things we landscape with from Asia in our yards, and you won't make a single monarch butterfly. The only thing that's going to make a monarch butterfly is one of the milkweeds. That is called host plant specialization. And it turns out that most of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. They can only eat particular plants. Why is that? Well, plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they've loaded their tissues with nasty tasting chemicals, secondary metabolic compounds that make those tissues either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense. It keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world, which is why it's green out there in the summertime. I guess down here, it's always green. It's not because there's no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most of the plants. They are too well protected. There's a reason it's hard to get our kids to eat their vegetables. They are inherently, they know that they're toxic. But insects do eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around those nasty chemicals? This is where the specialization comes in. Insects can only eat the plants for which they have the adaptations necessary to circumvent those chemical defenses. They need specialized enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those compounds, behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that minimize their exposure to those compounds. But it takes a long period of interacting over evolutionary time for the insects to develop all those adaptations. And once they do, they become locked into eating the particular plant lineage that they just specialized on. So if you take the milkweeds out of your yard, the monarch's not going to be able to start eating your eucalyptus. Can't do it. Has 2 choices then. Fly away and find milkweed someplace else, or starve to death. Turns out there's 3 kinds of plants out there. We want to make this as simple as possible because it is simple. There are plants that contribute energy to local food webs. There are plants that do not contribute energy to local food webs. And there are plants that remove energy from local food webs. The very best contributor in 84% of the counties in which they occur is one of our oaks. The genus Quercus is contributing more energy to local food webs than any other plant genus by far. Good example of a non-contributor would be a ginkgo biloba from Asia. Nice ornamental plant, has good fall color, but nothing eats a ginkgo. So it's not adding any of the energy it captured from the sun to local food webs. And a good example of a detractor would be any of the non-native plants we brought over that have escaped cultivation and become invasive species in our natural areas. Not only are they not supporting local food webs, but they're pushing out the native plants that do. So they're removing, the net effect is removing energy from those food webs. Now you got everybody has a lot of invasive plants, but California is no exception. We've measured what happens in an invasion like this to caterpillar biomass. And every time we measured, it's a reduction of about 96%. If you think of those caterpillars as bird food, you've just reduced bird food by 96%. Now, there are a lot of reasons our birds are declining, but starving them is certainly one of them. So all I'm trying to say here is that plant choice matters. We are not going to rebuild functional ecosystems if we don't have functional food webs in those ecosystems. And we're not going to have functional food webs unless we put the plants in that support those food webs. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of how well this works, starting with my house, our house. My wife wants me to call it our house just because she paid for it. This is what it looked like this is Oxford, Pennsylvania. In the year 2000, we got a 10-acre lot of a farm that was broken up into 10-acre lots. It was a very old farm, been farmed almost 300 years. And the last thing they did before we bought it was mow it for hay. So there were very few plants there. And our job was to restore the eastern deciduous ecosystem that was once there, which we had never done before and didn't know how to do. But one of the things I wanted to try was to plant the host plant of a particular moth species and see whether that species came and found that host plant and colonized it. Again, which I had never done. The first thing I tried was the Canadian owlet. People say, why'd you choose the Canadian owlet? I was looking through Dave Wagner's Caterpillars of Eastern North America, and I said, that's a pretty one. So that's what the adult looks like, just like leaves. I'd never seen a Canadian owlet before, but you're not going to have Canadian owlet unless you have their host plant, which is meadow row. And we didn't have any host plant. We didn't have any meadow row. I am sure that was there 300 years ago before the area was farmed to death, but long gone. So I got some meadow row seeds from someplace and I planted it, and they grew very nicely. But this was early on. I actually had very little faith that Canadian owlets would appear out of nowhere and colonize my little patch of meadow row. So I didn't even go out and check it. It was at least 2 months after I planted it. And then I was walking by for another reason, and I glanced over. It was covered with Canadian owlets. They had found it right away. I'm still impressed with that. So now we have a good population of Canadian owlets and meadow row. We've added 2 species to the property. The restoration has begun. Same story with the goldenrod stowaway. That's actually a misnomer, that beautiful moth. It has nothing to do with goldenrod. It's a specialist on that plant. Biden's aristosa, ditch daisy. And we didn't have any Biden's aristosa, but there was a patch of Biden's in a power line cut about 14 miles away. So I got some seeds, planted them at home. They did very nicely. As a matter of fact, last year they took over my front yard. That's okay. I had to wait a year for goldenrod stowaway to find my patch of Biden's, but they did, and now they're there. So we've added another 2 species. That's a total of 4 species to the property. Want to see if I can get the hackberry emperor to make a living at our house. Not because it's the most beautiful butterfly in the world, but because it belongs there. It's one of the species that ought to be there. And as its name suggests, it's a specialist on hackberry, on Celtis. We didn't have any hackberry. So I got some hackberry trees, planted them. I had to wait 4 years for the hackberry emperor to find my hackberry, but they did. Now we have a good population of them. We've added 6 species, and that is how the restoration proceeded. I did not plant goldenrod, came in on its own. Along with it came many of the things that specialize on goldenrod, like the beautiful brown-hooded owlet, the Arcidra flower moth, the goldenrod leaf miner, the distinct Sparaginothus, the goldenrod gall moth. There are 110 species of moths that use goldenrod in the mid-Atlantic states. Very important plant. I planted Virginia creeper. Now, back east, a lot of people don't like Virginia creeper, but I don't know why. It is a wonderful native plant. It has good fall color. It can climb our trees without girdling them, without pulling them down. It's a good ground cover. It makes valuable berries for the birds in the fall. There they are. Valuable because they are high in fat. Our migrating birds need sources of fat, and our overwintering birds need sources of fat, and those berries help provide it. And those berries came from tiny little inconspicuous flowers. You don't even know when Virginia creeper is in bloom until you see a big cloud of native bees around it. It turns out it's a really important pollinator plant. So remember, when you're making a pollinator garden, you're making it for the pollinators. If it's not big and showy for you, that's okay. I planted Virginia creeper because it's the best host plant for the large sphinx moths that are a primary component of cardinal diets. Things like the Pandora sphinx and its beautiful adult, the lettered sphinx, the hog sphinx, the abbot sphinx, all on Virginia creeper. Want to see if I get the evening primrose moth to make a living at our house because it's beautiful. I like beauty like anybody else. And as its name suggests, it's a specialist on evening primrose. And we didn't have any evening primrose. So I planted it specifically to attract that moth, and it worked. The moth came, it spends the day with its head stuffed in the flowers. Sometimes it's crowded in there, but it's always very cute. And I planted lots of oaks. Now, these are just examples of the plant lineages we have put on our property. But I want to focus on oaks for a while because they are such important plants. That's the Bedford oak in Bedford, New York, Martha Stewart land. People argue about whether it's 400 years old or 500 years old. It's enormous. And I hear people say, I'm not going to plant an oak because I won't live long enough to enjoy it. And if you can only enjoy your oak when it's 400 years old, you're right. You will not. But if you can enjoy what your oak is contributing to your local food web, you can enjoy it right away. And I can say that with confidence because I planted most of my oaks as acorns, free, or 2-foot bare root whips, which cost $1.50 each. And immediately they started to call in the moths that make the caterpillars that run the food web at our house. Things like the solitary oak leaf miner, Juvenal's dusky wing, the yellow-shouldered moth, Suzuki's promolactus, the red-washed caterpillar, the yellow-vested moth. There's the orange-tufted oneida, a spiny oak caterpillar, 2-spotted oak punky, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oakworm, the pink-striped oakworm, the hesitant dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the medium dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the streaked dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the crown bucolatrix, the orange-patched smoky wing, the white-blotched heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the red-line panapoda, the laugher, and literally hundreds more species of moths have come to the oaks on our property. I love it when people clap for the oaks. It's great. And look, they come right away. This is a pin oak that's just popped its head above the leaves. There's a caterpillar standing on the ground eating the leaves of that tree. And people say, oh no, it's going to kill the tree. No, an oven bird's going to come eat that in the next 20 minutes, and that'll be that. So it's the very first year your oaks will start to contribute to your local food web. You don't have to wait decades or hundreds of years. So the question is, now we put a lot of plants back in our yard, not all of them by any stretch. I took this picture pretty much from the same place I took that first picture. And the question is, has life returned? Does this work, in other words? Very important question. Now you can measure life any way you want. I'm measuring it in terms of the number of bird species that are breeding, have nested on our property, and the number of moth species that are now calling our property home. Moths, not butterflies. Butterflies are actually bad-tasting, day-flying moths. They really are. They come right out in the middle of the lineage of middle of the moth lineage. And because they don't taste very good, that's why they fly during the day. They're not adding a lot of food to the local food web. They're beautiful. We love them, but I'm just counting the moths. And I'm still doing it. I've been doing it for I don't know, 10 years now, I think. And I am up to 1,366 species of moths that I have pictures of that I've taken on our property because we put the plants back. And if we have time afterwards, I can show you that PowerPoint. We've got 10 acres. Pennsylvania is something like 23.9 million acres. So in one tiny, tiny, tiny slice of Pennsylvania, we've got 44% of all the moth species that occur in the entire state because we put the plants back. And because so many of those are types of bird food, we have recorded 62 species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres. Not flew by, but bred. Why am I telling you that? Well, this is another headline we see all the time. The World Wildlife Fund says that Earth has lost 2/3 of its wildlife since 1970. It's a terrible statistic. But I'm thinking, gee, not at our house. I am convinced we have increased biodiversity by more than 2/3. It didn't take that long, and it wasn't that hard. We just put the plants back. What would happen if everybody put the plants back? We really could turn a lot of these terrible statistics around. But will it work on smaller properties? Let's say in suburbia. Not everybody has 10 acres. That's a great question. So let's go to Margie and Dan Terpstra's house in Kirkwood, Missouri. They have 0.6 acres. 18 times less land than Cindy and I have. They're in the middle of a development. Everybody around them has the big lawns. When they moved into their yard, it was choked with Amur honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle, another big invasive in the Midwest. So the first thing they did was remove that. Then they planted 70 species of native plants. They put in a water feature that they call a bubbler. And then they started to count the birds that are using their yard. And they're still at it, but they're up to 154 bird species that have stopped in their 0.6 acres, including an amazing 35 warbler species. We've only recorded 18 warbler species at our house. So does it work on smaller properties? Absolutely. What about urban yards? Let's go to Pam Carlson's house in Chicago. And I mean in Chicago because her property abuts O'Hare Airport. She has 1/10 of an acre, 3 times smaller than the average lot size. She's not connected to any natural area at all. She's a tiny little island in the middle of Chicago. It is a pretty island because Pam is a native plant landscaper and she knows what she's doing. She did the same thing. She removed the non-native plants on her property, put in 60 species of native plants, including a water feature, and then she sat back, she always says, with a glass of wine, and started counting the birds that are using her yard. And she's also still at it, but she's up to 127 species of birds that have used her yard, her little 1/10 of an acre, including a woodcock. There's Pam's woodcock. So if you haven't seen a woodcock lately, go to Pam's house in Chicago. All right, there's 4 things we need to think about if we're going to succeed in a big way, and we want to succeed in a big way. And one of those things is we've got to talk about all the lawn that's out there. Now, I know you guys in Southern California are not big offenders, but the rest of the nation is. We've got 44 million acres of lawn nationwide. That's an area bigger than all of New England combined, dedicated to an ecological deadscape. Why do we do that? Well, it's a status symbol. It's a very important status symbol, and we love our status symbols. We also love neat, and it's easy to keep lawn neat, and we have to display our Halloween decorations. So remember, there's 4 ecological responsibilities that every bit of private property has out there. Every landscape has to support a viable food web. Every landscape, if you don't have a viable food web, you don't have any animals. If you don't have any animals, you don't have a functional ecosystem. Every landscape has to sequester carbon to help climate change. Every landscape has to manage the watershed in which it lies. And every landscape has to support pollinators. Lawn does none of those things, which is why I pick on it. So let's reduce the area of lawn. Let's cut it in half. Now notice I'm not saying let's get rid of it. It's the perfect plant to walk on. But let's start by reducing it by half. Let's make the math simple. Well, let's take areas that look like this and turn them into this. This is a picture I got from Dan Getman, again in Missouri. He had that big lawn there, and he said, look, I'm planting native plants, and he sent me that picture. So let's make the math simple, say that we've got 40 million acres of lawn. We're going to cut that in half. That'll give us 20 million acres that we can restore right at home. And that's what we're going to create Homegrown National Park out of. And it'll be big. It'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, plus Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. Add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park will be the biggest park in the country. You can join it, small nonprofit at this point, but you go to our website, homegrownnationalpark.org, and register your property on the biodiversity map. So just your location and the amount of your property you're pledging to be a good steward of. Or maybe you already are, but even if you're not, you're going to pledge. Maybe you really are going to reduce the area of lawn. Maybe you're going to plant an oak. Maybe you're going to put an aster in a flower pot. It doesn't matter how modest it is. Then your little piece of your county is going to light up with a firefly. And you can see how many other people in your county have joined Homegrown National Park by how many fireflies there are. And of course, the object is to get the entire country, the entire world, to light up with fireflies. Canada's playing this game now too. So our mission is very simple. We want to catalyze people to plant native and remove natives. We want to increase biodiversity in the way that you increase biodiversity, by putting the native plants that support it in your yard, removing the non-natives that don't, and in so doing, creating a culture that's sympathetic to the needs of conservation. There are real ecological products associated with Homegrown National Park. One is a significant increase in biodiversity. And when I look at what's happened at our house, it works. It really does work. I've been amazed at how fast nature has repaired herself if you give her half a chance. Measurable reduction in invasive species. If everybody removed the invasive plants just from their property, something very doable, we'd be almost 80% done in the country, 85% done in the East. Not totally done, but a very good first step. significant drawdown of atmospheric CO2. Lawn is the worst plant for sequestering carbon. So if you replace it with any other kind of planting, you're going to sequester more carbon and help climate change. You're also going to create habitat outside of parks and preserves. Any bit of conservation we do outside of a park helps conservation inside of the park. But there are equally important sociological benefits of homegrown national park, and one is national awareness. Not just of what the problems are, but what the solutions are and what our roles in those solutions are. We are trying to change the culture. We want people to recognize that nature's not optional. It's not just there for our entertainment. It's essential for everybody, which means everybody owns responsibility to sustaining it. We want to convert hope into action. Hope is good, but action's even better. And we want to merge all the existing conservation organizations that are doing great conservation on private property onto one visual, the biodiversity map. So things like Audubon, National Wildlife Federation, Sierra Club. We've got this 30 by 30 initiative. We're going to save 30% of the planet by 2030, or 30% of the US by 2030. Not if we don't count conservation that's happening on private property. So that's what that biodiversity map is all about. Did I mention Homegrown National Park is free? We're not trying to pull people away from other conservation organizations. We just want to record the good conservation that's happening on private property. So we're going to shrink the lawn. What plants should we put in the area that was once lawn? Well, I'm going to say that some of those plants need to be what I call keystone plants. Remember what a keystone is. It's the stone in the middle of the Roman arch, and if you take the stone out of the arch collapses. Well, if you take keystone plants out of your local food web, the food web collapses because those are the plants making most of the food. Those are the plants supporting most of the caterpillars. Just 14% of our native plants are supporting 90% of the caterpillar biomass that's driving those food webs. So think of the keystone plants in the ecological house that you're building as the 2x4s that hold that house up. They are the support system. You can't build a house without support. We cannot build a house out of wallpaper, and that's what we've been trying to do for the last 100 years. Again, oak's number one keystone plant throughout the country in the areas that it occurs. 270 species of caterpillars supported by oaks in California. Over 1,000 species nationwide. No other plant genus comes close to that. So how do you know what the best plants are where you live? You go to CalScape. You folks in California have the best tool for finding this information in the entire country. It is called CalScape, created by the California Native Plant Society. And you look up where you are. Every single native plant population is georeferenced in the state. So you can see, here's where I live. Here are the plants that belong there. And you can also see how many caterpillars those plants are supporting. Very valuable tool. So we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to use keystone plants. We're going to invite a lot of insects into our yard, and then we're going to kill them with our security light, which is not the goal. It turns out that light pollution is one of the major causes of insect declines around the country. And those are all the ways that lights are killing our insects, particularly the moths that make the caterpillars that run our food webs. So it's a really serious environmental problem, particularly given the number of lights that we have on all the time. So it's a really serious environmental problem, but it has a really simple solution. First of all, you are allowed to turn out your light. There's no rule against that. If you're worried about security, and everybody is, put a motion sensor on your light so that it only turns on when the bad man comes, and you will find he doesn't come that often. Even easier is to take the white bulb out of your security light and put in a yellow light, an amber light. You can buy them at the hardware store. They're called bug lights. Sounds like they're going to kill your insects, but they're actually going to protect them because nocturnal insects are not attracted to yellow wavelengths. So if we were to switch out our white bulbs for yellow lights overnight, we'd save millions of insects. And if we use yellow LEDs, we'd save millions of dollars too. So the fourth thing we need to do is to landscape in a way that allows those all-important caterpillars to complete their development. Now, I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where oaks support 511 species of caterpillars. A few of them, like the polyphemus moth, complete their development on the tree. The caterpillar eats the leaves, then they spin a cocoon and hang from one of the branches, then they emerge as an adult, then they do it all over again. Everything happens on the tree. But that is an exception. Most of the species and this is not just oaks. They'll complete the development as a caterpillar and then drop from the tree and wiggle their way underneath the soil and pupate underground, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that's under the tree. And that's the problem. There is no leaf litter under the tree. We don't tolerate it. It's messy. And we mow and compact the area under our trees so that the area is rock hard. Very difficult for those caterpillars to get underground to safety. Which takes, that's an oak right there, that takes that plant and makes it an ecological trap. It calls in the moths, they lay their eggs, caterpillars develop, drop down, and die. And of course, the cement landscape is not the answer either. Now, this is what most people do. They have a tree in a yard, and most of the time, the lawn is going right up to the tree. Recent grad student Emma Jonas measured how well caterpillars do in a situation like that compared to a layered landscape like this. And of course, they do much better in a layered landscape like that. Heather Holm and Rebecca McCracken call this soft landing. Actually, has nothing to do with buffering their fall when they drop. What it does do, though, is it keeps us out. It creates a no-go zone where we're not mowing and we're not walking, which means the soil is not compacted. And there's also leaf litter down there. It's exactly what those caterpillars need to complete their development. And you can do that in the West here as well. Just make areas where you're not going to be tramping or mowing all the time, and the caterpillars will love it. And so will the trees. That one of the people interviewed on the little video, the Desiree Narango, she was my former student. And she did a great study in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. that told us lots of things, but one of the important messages was there is room for compromise in our choice of plants. And it turns out that what she was doing was seeing what types of landscapes are capable of supporting chickadee populations sustainably. And she found that it needed at least 70% native plant biomass to support a chickadee population. But that leaves 30% that you can fool around with. Now, we can't tolerate any invasive plants. They are ecological tumors that don't stay where we plant them, and they just keep growing and growing and growing. I did get an email from somebody saying, can't we have just a few? I said, well, how many tumors do you want in your body? Just a few, you know? They don't stay just a few. That's the problem. But, you know, in the East, crepe myrtle is a big one. So crepe myrtle, okay. Ginkgo, okay. Calorie pear, not okay. Doesn't stay where you plant it. But it allows you can, you know, gardeners love beauty, and you can enhance your landscape with very attractive plants as long as they are not invasive and as long as it doesn't exceed 70% native plants. Remember Dan Getman? That's a ginkgo tree in the middle of Dan's native plant garden. Why does Dan have a ginkgo tree in his native plant garden? Well, it turns out Dan's wife likes ginkgo trees, and Dan likes his wife. So he planted a ginkgo tree. The question is that tree going to destroy the ecological integrity of that landscape? No, it's not. It's just there. Is it going to escape and wreck the woodlot? No. It's not invasive. It's just there. So I like to think of plants that are, you know, they're just ornamental, staying there, not doing much, but being pretty as their statue. So there you go. There's Dan's statue. If all of Dan's plants were statues, he would not have a functional landscape. The point is, it's not the presence of these non-native plants that destroys food webs. It's the absence of the productive native plants that is destroying them. So if we get more of the native plants in there, we can tolerate non-natives without ruining anything. Can we use natives in formal designs? Of course we can. This is a Lynn O'Shaughnessy design, taken by a drone 400 feet up. You don't get more formal than that, and every plant in that landscape is a native plant. Formality is a function of the design. It's not a function of the plants in the design. Our native plants are used in formal designs in Europe. Every day they love them over there. If the Europeans can love our native plants, maybe we can too. Can we get a pollinator garden into a small yard like this without offending anybody? Of course we can. Put a little fence around it. It formalizes it. It tells your neighbors that this is intentional. It's not just a few weeds you forgot to mow. It's pretty when it's in bloom. It's meeting the needs of several species of bees. It's not very big. It could be bigger. But if everybody did it, it would help a lot. Help what? Help make pollinators. Why do we need pollinators? Well, the media will tell you we need pollinators because they're pollinating a third of our plants, our ag plants. But I've heard people say, I don't live next to a farm, so I don't need any pollinators. Forget the ag argument. They're pollinating 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants, including a few ag plants. But we need pollinators everywhere we need plants, which is everywhere. And you've got some wonderful pollinator plants here that not only, this is ceanothus, this is California lilac. It's a very powerful caterpillar plant as well as a pollinator plant. Your asters do both as well. Can municipalities help us live with nature? Can they incentivize it? Of course they can. And Minnesota's been doing it for a number of years now. They have a cost-sharing program where they're paying homeowners to reduce or replace their lawns with appropriate Minnesota prairie plants. It's very popular. And so popular that Pennsylvania started a similar program. Virginia's thinking about it. I wish it would spread all over the country. There's an island off of Florida, Marco Island, that is paying homeowners to allow burrowing owls, listed species, to burrow in the front yard. Endangered species. This is how the Endangered Species Act should have been written, with carrots rather than sticks. If you have an endangered species on your property, we're going to pay you to take care of it, rather than fine you if you use your property. Everybody would want an endangered species. Put a bounty on invasive ornamentals like calorie pear. That's what St. Louis, Missouri did. Fayetteville, Arkansas, North Carolina. If you take out a calorie pear, you get a free tree replacement. San Antonio and other public utilities are giving people $100 coupons to plant water-efficient native plants. And of course, the lawn reduction programs you have it down here, Los Angeles County and other places. That's going up $3 per rebate per square foot of lawn you remove because, California does not have enough water for lawns. So I think we made 3 missteps in the early years of conservation. And the first one's important. We're starting to think of nature as if it's optional. We like nature. We like to go bird watching or just sit and commune with it, but it's not essential, we think. And if it's not essential, when push comes to shove, when resources are in short supply, nature takes a back seat. And of course, resources are always in short supply. I went to the Cincinnati Zoo. And there's this wall-sized poster there, which to me epitomizes our society's view of conservation. We want to save wildlife. We want to save nature so that future generations can enjoy it. That was Teddy Roosevelt's argument for expanding the national park system. Beautiful places, we want to save them so that future generations can enjoy it. And I get that because nature is enormously entertaining, but it is much more than that. We need to save nature so that we have future generations. It's a little bit more urgent. We've also assumed that humans and nature cannot coexist. We talked about this, but if we confine conservation just to the places where there's very few humans, we're going to fail because those places are too small, there's too few of them, and they're too isolated. David Quammen has a wonderful analogy between a Persian rug and an ecosystem. That is a functional Persian rug. That's not 71 Persian rugs. That's 71 rug fragments, none of which are acting like a Persian rug, and that's what we've done to our ecosystems. The UN designates biosphere reserves as places of ecological significance, and I don't like that language because it suggests there are places on planet Earth with no ecological significance. Not so. Every square inch of the planet has ecological significance, including our yards, including our corporate landscapes, including our roadsides, even including much of our agriculture. So we need to glue our rug back together again, folks. We've got to put the plants back. Not just to make biological corridors that connect isolated habitat fragments with each other, but to repopulate, restore places where we remove nature altogether. And the good news is it's starting to happen. It is starting to happen all over the country. And when it does, it'll be the first time in modern history that we humans have coexisted with the natural world. Our third misstep was to leave Earth stewardship to just a few specialists, a few conservation biologists, a few ecologists. For some reason, we didn't see it as an inherent responsibility of every human being on the planet. But I don't know why, since every single human being on the planet depends entirely on the quality of local ecosystems. So why wouldn't everybody bear the responsibility of taking care of those ecosystems? It does not mean you have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live. And if you do, it empowers you. More and more people are upset about the state of the planet, but they feel powerless. What can one person do? Well, one person can shrink the lawn, one person can change their light bulb, one person can remove the invasive plants from their property, one person can put in a pollinator garden, one person can, I don't know if you hire mosquito foggers, you can fire them because they kill all the insects. There's a whole bunch of things that one person can do to revitalize the little ecosystem on their property and then enhance their greater local ecosystem. And it also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problem. Just worry about the piece of the earth that you can influence. If you own property, it's obvious. That's where you start. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a land conservancy, help a park or preserve. They're all underfunded. They're all understaffed. They would love you as a volunteer. Aldo Leopold once said, one of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. He said that in the 40s, and he was alone in a world of wounds, but you are no longer alone. Everywhere, people are starting to heal their wounds on their little piece of the earth, and you can as well. Robert Swan recently said the greatest threat to our planet is believing that someone else will save it. Not going to be someone else, folks. It's going to be you, because you are nature's best hope. Thanks very much. Okay, thank you. Any questions? Thank you. I guess we have a little time for some questions. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
How are you getting pictures of all those moths?
I use a camera. Yeah.
I have lots of keystone species, and I stare in the daytime at the leaves. I don't see any moths.
Yeah, they don't want you to see them. They're hiding, and they're very good at it. So one of the things you can do is go out at night. A lot of them are much more apparent at night when the birds are not hunting them. Use a flashlight. During the day, they're hiding underneath the leaves so the birds can't see them, or they go off the plant altogether. They're on the sticks or the bark. You have to form what we call a search image. I did not take all those pictures in one day. So, yes. Go ahead.
Why are so many moths called owlet?
That's a common name of the family Noctuidae. So if they're in that family, and it's a very large family, they're called owlet moths. Why? I do not know. Yes.
Is it wise to plant natives that support moths on caterpillars in the parkways between the street and the sidewalk on busier streets?
Yeah, the hell strip. It's a good question. We've got about 4 million miles of paved roads in the country, and each one of those roads has two sides. And if there's a verge, a habitat on both sides, it could be a lot of potential habitat. And in some areas, the verge is like down south, Alabama, Mississippi, the verge is like 100 yards wide, and it's mowed. So it could be a lot of really good habitat. And if you're in a busy street and you plant habitat right next to the street, you're increasing the chances that those insects are going to be hit by cars. But if it's fairly slow traffic, that could be all right. So you have to use judgment. We did do a study. I did a study with some undergrads a few years ago, and we found that insects are hit by cars, but the real problem is when we landscape the median of a high-speed highway, because there's no way they can get there without crossing traffic. The edges of the roads seem to be okay, so. Right. The object is to make more insects than you're killing. And that's difficult to measure, so we don't know. Anything else? Yes.
Is there a coherent database of finding the right plant for the right insect?
That's what Native Plant Finder. Native Plant Finder is the National Wildlife Federation database, but your Cowscape is better. So yes, Cowscape. Yeah. A caterpillar?
When the caterpillars come out?
Oh, no, yes. No, yes. There are species that are active all year Yeah, even where I live, there are a whole bunch of moths called winter moths. They don't even come out till early November. But for the most part, it's seasonal. But I mean, there's this horticultural myth going around that if you wait to a certain number of degree days in the spring, then you can clean up and destroy everything because everything will have emerged. That's not true. They emerge sequentially throughout the entire summer and into the fall. So you want to landscape in a way where you're always preserving something that has been overwintering. Yes.
So here in California, we have the California Environmental Quality Act, but it's really being degraded because everybody wants to come in, we're in this vicious cycle of too many homes, Airbnbs, but what happens is they want low maintenance, and one of the things is they're putting in this artificial turf. Is there any kind of it's another microplastic, is there any kind of a national effort to curb, to look at the environmental hazards of this plastic grass that people are coming in?
Well, if you paved over the entire planet, that would be low maintenance too. But sure, you're removing any form of habitat. You're even removing water absorption. You're wrecking the watershed. Nothing.
It seems to be nothing is stopped trying to
Yeah,
stop it.
yeah. There should be infiltration rules in your township about what infiltration can be blocked, and I bet you've already exceeded what should be blocked. So adding to that ought to be against the law. You're right. National effort? No, they'd say it's up to the states. But you're right. There's nothing positive about that. Low maintenance.
Yeah, anyway, it's awful.
It's one of the benefits.
Looking at the microplastic problems also that will
Yeah,
create,
sure.
or the toxicity of
Yeah.
plastic that's being used as the turf.
Yep. Nothing good about it. I don't know of any national effort to control it, though. Yes. So who else? Who was first? Go ahead.
So I've been planting with native plants in rentals that I've lived in for almost 15 years now, and that has kept me really hopeful. But I'm wondering how you, in the face of so much continued degradation, I go from where I live in Ojai into Ventura or Oxnard or Camarillo, and I see so many non-native plants. It gets overwhelming to me. How do you, in particular, maintain your hope and maintain your motivation in the face of all of that?
Because I hear people like you tell me you've been doing it for 15 years. And 10 years ago, you wouldn't have told me that. I can see the long-term trend. The demand for native plants nationwide is exceeding the supply. That's a business opportunity that'll start to feed on itself. There's just a lot of interest around the country. So that's what keeps me going. It seems to be working. We're changing a 100-year-old culture here, and that's not going to happen overnight, but it is happening a lot faster than I thought it would. So, yes.
I'm from Altadena, and I lost my house in the Eaton fire. And as I'm sure you know, the whole of Altadena burned down. And I am wondering if there are any model communities that have worked with a large number of homes and homeowners, not just recovering from something like a fire, but just that have a sense of urgency around planning. So if there are any successful models, because right now there are a lot of people who are interested in informing residents, but it's kind of a patchwork.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. We don't have that issue in the East, so I'm not an expert on that at all. But I would talk to the folks at the California Native Plant Society for examples like that. They have designs that you can use. I guess the whole state is talking about this 5-foot space between the house and we're going to have no plants at all, gravel. But there are other plants that are very good at intercepting flying embers, like live oaks. They put them out. So rather than saying my oak tree is going to burn me down, it's probably going to save you. The biggest problem is what we build our houses out of. If you look at pictures of the Paradise Fire, all the houses are nothing and the trees are standing right there. It's because we build out a highly flammable material. So we've got to correct that too. But yeah, I'm not the guy who can point you to a good example. It's fairly recent, So if there are good examples, they will be really recent ones. So
The garden is working on building that database and trying to provide examples
Good, great. Yes.
Following up on fire, so do you have any guidance in balancing the needs of trying to contribute to the ecosystem with the very real requirements often imposed by fire departments on clearing brush, mowing weeds, that sort of thing? We have a 6 to 9 month period of fires here.
Yeah. It's really the same question. How we landscape in a fire-wise way, and I'm going to turn it over to the garden to provide all that information. And you want to remove fuel, but zero plants is. I think we can do better than that. I really do. Yes.
Does housekeep have like a thing that says whether a species of plant attracts an endangered insect or something like that?
Dangerous insects? Endangered insects. I don't know if that's part of Calscape or not. Does anybody?
I think it will, on every plant, it notes what pollinators, what insects it attracts. So if you do one step of your own homework and find out what are the ones that are endangered,
Right.
and then look,
Yeah.
you'll be able to.
Yeah. Yeah. A little bit more work on your end, but you can probably track it down. Yes.
Talking about milkweed and butterfly confusion, and sometimes you're not supposed to plant certain types.
You're probably talking about you.
Go ahead, but if you're not sure about California.
Well, there's Asclepias curassavica, which is the tropical milkweed that is very popular in the east. I know. Is that what we're talking about here? It's the milkweed that grows right where the monarchs overwinter. And there's a concern that if you plant a lot of that, the monarchs won't migrate the way they should. They pretty much, there's not a lot of evidence supporting that in the East. A bigger problem is when you plant milkweeds that do not die back in the wintertime, because then the disease, we'll just call it OE, it's a protozoan, builds up, the spores build up on the plant tissue. There are places in Louisiana and Mississippi where monarchs that visit old Asclepias curassavica, 90% of them get infected. So that's a reason to not plant a plant a milkweed that doesn't belong where you are. And that's all I know about it. You want to add to that?
If you do have it, sorry. If you do have the tropical milkweed, if you cut it down between November and February, so basically you take away, you make it dormant, then you avoid the OE.
Both and the migratory problem too. Yeah.
Because OE is on all milkweed, even the narrow leaf milkweed. So it's a matter of keeping the load down.
Right. I think that's it, folks.